And do you still have people coming into the meeting?
Just one more just is joining right now.
Okay.
But you're probably fine to get started. So we stay on schedule.
All right. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's just afternoon. I think we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, I am Bob Whipperfirth. I'm the president of the Village of Windsor, and I also serve as president of the Dane County Cities and Villages Association. So again, we would like to welcome everybody. There was an invitation extended to the Dane County Towns Association as well. So there may be some folks from the various towns throughout Dane County in the meeting today. And I think the elected officials and the administrators that are in the meeting, we probably recognize each other by name. But if you happen to be with maybe the public works departments, if you can just identify which community you're from and maybe just say public works, just so we have a general idea of who's attending the meeting, that would be appreciated. So today we're going to have two guest speakers. We have David Noyce. He is the PhD chair of the UW-Madison Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory. And we have Brian Berquist, who is an engineer with Town and Country Engineering. So we would like to thank both of them for their time and talents for being here today. And just wanted to recognize Jim Schuler. He is a Village of Maple Bluff trustee. This was a request of his to bring forth hopefully some good ideas for various municipalities on what we can do with some traffic management, traffic controls, cameras, whatever that may consist of. So with that, we will have the presentations. David will be going first. He'll go through his presentation and then we'll have questions for David afterwards. And then after that, Brian will go through his slide presentation and then questions and answers after that. So as normal with these roundtables, we will be done by 1 o'clock. So if we can all keep that time parameter in mind. And with that, I think without further ado, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome, David, and thank you for being here. You can go first.
Sounds great. So I'm going to hit screen share here. Hopefully. How's that? Y'all see a PowerPoint now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is David Noyce. I'm with the College of Engineering at UW-Madison and serve several different roles, as you see there, but I'll be talking to you from my role as a faculty member and director of the Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory. What I'm going to do very quickly, just go over an array of things that we are working on here in the college that's directly or maybe sometimes indirectly related to this active and passive traffic control topic that you've asked us to visit on, and then give you some talking points at the end here. And I think, hopefully we'll get some time for questions and answers, and I can address a little bit more focus on some of the things that you're thinking about. So let me just talk a bit about what some of the things we're doing in the municipal space related to traffic management and to some degree automation development. The world is changing, right, in terms of transportation, especially as we get into automated vehicles. We start to add smarts to both the roadside and the vehicle itself. This is a vehicle that we affectionately call the Badger. We're working with the city of Racine in this particular project to show how automated transportation can be used to solve some of the typical municipal activities. Think street sweeping, think some of the maintenance activities and so forth, but using a demonstration vehicle like this to begin to explore. And just as a quick overview, what we're doing now is we're testing this vehicle and the automation of the system, in a network in downtown Racine, and exploring all the different types of both active and passive control issues related to signalization. They have a unique drawbridge, which adds to some complications to the way these systems think, and so on and so forth. So just an example, I wanted to start out with of ways that we are looking at how to automate and integrate with some of the different types of traffic management issues in a municipal level. Similarly, here in the city of Madison, we're working on Park Street and looking at an array of active communication between traffic signal systems. All the intersections have had smarts, if you will, added to them to begin to think about how we could communicate not only with all the vehicles and all the users, but also with the transit system and other elements of the Park Street corridor. This sample is being linked in with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation to the Beltline. And again, just to see how we can automate and communicate and improve some of the efficiencies and safety of this particular system. I'm sure you're all excited about this transition into automated vehicles, right? And so some of you may have a Tesla, or you're getting somewhere close to this type of technology. We got a long ways to go before we're there, but it's fun to see what some of these vehicles can do. And this is one of my colleagues here in the lab in a vehicle we're working on that it can drive itself. It can't make all the decisions it needs to make, but it can certainly drive itself. And, kind of a little bit tongue in cheek in the little lower video that you see here, but nevertheless, I mean, the world is heading in terms of active and passive traffic control to, do we need it in the future? There may be a day where if the vehicles are communicating and they're smart and they're able to interact with each other, the whole idea of some of the traffic control elements we need may no longer be needed, but that is a long ways away. One of the other things that will impact communities in the very near future is something we're working on that's essentially related to automated trucking. And for lack of a better description, a lot of the last mile deliveries now are being explored in an automated way, simply sitting at a computer desk and controlling the vehicle through a joystick. And that type of operation is being used around the world. This is an example of a system that's out of Sweden that we are now testing here in the US, and we're working with. But one of our research activities now is developing these systems and to see how we can improve the last mile delivery to our communities with an automated system that's both safe and reliable. It can add a lot of efficiencies to the overall system. Similarly, with the move towards electric vehicles and some of the range anxiety and the other challenges that go along with it, I know a lot of municipalities are looking at, how do we develop the charging station network and so forth. Well, the other key component of being able to use this within the municipal side, with your vehicles or with just the general public, is overcoming some of the range anxiety issues with dynamic charging. And we're developing a test station right now to show how, whether it's inductive or conductive, how can we, as you drive along the road, add energy to the system such that the vehicles can charge as they go and don't need the charging stations as frequently as they currently do. So we find that one pretty exciting, and that's happening as well. And then lastly, before we get into, well, maybe not lastly, one more thing before we get into some more specifics is thinking about interactions of different modes. And I know that's a big issue in every community. We're using a series of driving simulators that a little bit beyond the scope here, but we're working with people from around the country. But what we're trying to explore is how we improve the safety of our systems with bicycle interaction, not looking at pedestrians in this particular effort, but thinking about how vehicles and bicycles interact on a little bit higher speed type roadways. I can't see the list of people around the call here, but this is Highway M, going from Fitchburg into the town of Oregon. And the idea here was just with a lot of technology on a bicycle, looking at how the vehicle and bicycle interacts. And part of this research is also looking at the integration of rumble strips and other communication devices to improve the quality of the quality and safety of the roadway and see how all these systems interact. So those are things we can talk more about if you're interested as well. The flashing yellow arrow, which I know you all love, and has improved the quality of left turn operations in your communities. This is something we developed here and have a whole series of research reports on it. But now it used to be something somewhat novel. Now it's pretty commonplace on most of the signal installations, especially the new ones. And hopefully you're finding that's working well in your community. And then lastly, I'll just mention before we get into the details, we need more engineers. You're probably finding that in your communities as well. Across the country, we graduate about 12,000, close to 13,000 engineers that get involved in municipal related activities, at least at some level. We need 25,000 a year. So we're graduating half of what we need. So part of the things we're working on here at the university is trying to increase that. You may have heard we have some challenges going on in trying to get a new engineering building and and some other things that's happening as we speak. And hopefully some good news comes out later today and we begin to move forward in some of those elements. What I will invite all of you to sometime next year is a American Society of Civil Engineers presentation on a program we put together that's called Future World Vision. It's an IMAX movie, that will get one of the theaters to put on for us here. But it looks at what the future of cities may look like and some of the new technologies and things that are coming along. Again, a little bit off topic here, but I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And I'll tell you more about that and share it with the organization, when we get to that point. So all this comes together into our Wisconsin transportation system here at the university, that we're always here to help you wherever we can, with the different things that you have. So let's get a little bit more focused in, and very briefly, and then I'll turn it over to Brian, what I think you're interested in learning more about. So I've thought about it in two different approaches in trying to read the minds, if you will, of kind of what the core topics are you want us to discuss. I think we all understand what traffic management is. And if you go to the textbook version, if you will, that's what I put up here on the screen. But I think we're all interested in providing a safe, orderly, and efficient movement of people and goods in our communities. And obviously, we want to think about safety and reliability. But this new world, we also have to think about security, right? In both in terms of data security as well as general security of how our systems ultimately manage. And then maybe getting into a few more of the details, kind of relating traffic management and traffic calming and how they integrate into many of the things that you're looking at. Again, kind of a long-winded definition, just so we're on the same page, but thinking about the physical and other measures we put into our transportation system to help generally control speed, but control the movement of vehicles in general, including pedestrians and bicycles. So some common examples, and we'll talk about those. And I know, at least I understand, Brian has some examples of things that he's put together with his organization. But some of the common examples, as I'm sure you know, are vertical deflections to control speed. I know most of your communities have some form of a speed hump or speed table or general raised intersection. Proved to be effective. The data continues to show that they are effective in reducing speeds. Not necessarily overly popular with the driving public, but are effective. More and more communities are looking at what's generally described as horizontal shifts or chicanes or other movements along that way to provide some movement that requires a little bit lower speed to navigate those systems, that generally parallels with narrowing of the roadway lanes as well. And then we get into some broader areas of dedicated lanes, some more physical closures to help control different movements, different types of signing. And we are not a state that allows or at least works with camera enforcement, but many other communities and locations find that to be very effective as well. So my last point here is just to kind of summarize some of the things that I'm familiar with and happy to talk about as we get to the discussion point here of our presentation. But you're thinking about passive and active systems. And what I would argue, there's also a hybrid that oftentimes thought about as the active system. The passive ones are obviously traffic control devices, generally in the form of signs. And we use that to help control, what we've learned, at least from a research perspective, is using signage to try to control speed or other negative driving behaviors in your communities is generally not effective. So the passive side is not something that, beyond the need to stop and yield or something else, generally does not change driver behavior significantly. The ones that do, I call more hybrid, where there's physical elements to it in terms of the humps and deflections we talked about, the change in directions, moving into traffic circles and roundabouts and so forth. Those work and they change driver behavior, but they don't provide feedback, which is what I tend to think about when we talk about active systems. The active systems of feedback signage, getting beyond perhaps what you think about it in your communities, but if the Beltline obviously has an active lane now that has signage and so forth. So those are things that we can talk more about and how they may be implemented and some of the success and failures that people have experienced along those ways. So all of these are effective. I'm sure you've tried and used many of these in your community in different ways. and be glad to talk more about those as we get into the next part. But let me stop here and let Brian share with you his thoughts, and then we'll get into some more discussion. So I'm going to stop my share here, and Brian, you can pick it up.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I've got a smattering of things that we've run into in the work that we do. I do see a number of familiar faces on the call, but for those of you who haven't worked with Town and Country before, let me get my screen share up here. There we are. We are a small firm that specializes in municipal engineering only. So we only work for small cities and villages. We are based here in Madison, so we happen to work for about 10 of the villages and a handful of the towns in Dane County. Generally around about 100-mile radius from each of our offices. We do a lot of this drinking water, wastewater work. But my specialty is what we call municipal engineering, and I've run into dozens of communities that are interested in traffic management, traffic calming, and we've got for you some examples of what we've instituted. Some of the other communities we work alongside have done, and what works and what hasn't. For us, being engineers, we're always going to try to define things a bit. So from our perspective, we view traffic calming as physical measures that are intended to promote safety. Ideally, cohesive safety that improves it for bikes, peds, and vehicles, all users of the street. Different communities have different policies that they've enacted. Some of the terms you may be familiar with are complete streets, safe routes to school, Vision Zero, and more recently green streets. All similar but different in their own way on what their priorities are. But obviously, generally, we're all looking to make everything safer for everyone. We're using these as physical measures, actual things that are built to impact driver behavior. And that's different than what we would call traffic control. So some of the things that David mentioned, signs and signals, things that have legal standing also do work to impact driver behavior. A lot of the pros and cons of some of the traffic calming items that we've been part of are at their core a psychology experiment. How can we get people to consciously and subconsciously do the right thing when nobody's looking?
So I have not.
Hey, Jamie, I think you're not on mute. There we go. So we always start at the beginning. One of the hardest things for the communities we've worked in that have executed on some traffic calming measures are how do you start? How do you identify where is a problem, which by doing so automatically declares that other areas are not problems? Sometimes that can cause some heated discussions between neighbors, where some people feel like once you do a speed study and you show that the 85th percentile of car speeds is above or below a certain number, that should automatically signal that there is a problem. Not every community, not every neighborhood within a community views 5 miles an hour over the speed limit as a problem. In some places, it's a 1 mile an hour over is a big deal. But then we often like to at least recommend that the community dive a little deeper into, even things like, how do you define speed as a problem? Is it the 85th percentile, which is what are most people driving? That does just by statistical practice, lop off the 15% of the highest speeders and declares those people as unfixable. We're not going to worry about the 15% most speeders because they're going to drive fast no matter what. Other communities we work in do not subscribe to that. Their philosophy is, in fact, those are the people we're worried about. Who's driving stupidly fast, and how do we lop off the end of that bell curve? And then you need to have a discussion on, well, what's stupidly too fast? Is 10 miles an hour over the speed limit need to be addressed? 15? Really getting each community to do some soul searching on what they view as safe and dangerous. Accident history is always something that we'll check. A lot of times the communities we work in are always small, a few hundred to a few thousand people, and they just don't have the crash history that a Madison or a Middleton, Monona would have. So that's not always helpful, but that's always some place to check. And then you always have the anecdotal close calls, people seeing something or being part of I was crossing the road and I almost got hit. I was riding my bike. I almost got hit. I saw a child almost get hit. Trying to come up with a way to make sure to receive those concerns, but also to kind of categorize them into what is going to be actionable. We always strongly recommend that a community really define how you want your community to define problems. Not only so that you can defend yourself and your decisions against people who don't like what you just did, and there'll always be that, but also for future requests. Often we see a bit of a copycat scenario where if a community does indeed decide to install a speed hump or stop sign, what have you, there is an uptick in other places in that community wanting the same thing. And if nothing else, to be consistent is a real goal for our recommendation from our standpoint, that a community should have a set of rules or regulations or framework on how to evaluate those. Because support is never unanimous. Inevitably, even after putting out mailings, putting out polls, going door to door, not everyone is going to like what got built. There is very little that can be done that does not have some negative impacts to one cohort or negative impacts to a different neighborhood. In its essence, traffic calming is trying to make high speeds or dangerous decisions less likely by putting up physical things. At some point, the drivers that are being too fast or being dangerous, as that is defined, they're going to find some other place. They're going to go elsewhere, which will lead to higher traffic counts elsewhere. Speed humps on the south side of a neighborhood could lead to aggressive or higher speeds between the humps or right after the humps, as drivers subconsciously try to make up this hypothetical lost time. You do often get concerns from the emergency response community that their response times are going to be impacted. So in some corridors, some of the traditional items just are rejected out of hand. So it's important to be consistent, as I mentioned. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to say yes to some and no to others that may feel they have a similar case. Locally, Madison and Middleton in particular, we found have a very robust and now a fairly long history of their processes and procedures on how they evaluate requests, evaluate situations, prioritize projects, and react to the results. They are very similar. They were both developed at about the same time in the early 2000s. But if your community is looking to start going from nothing to something, these two locations are a great place to start, and they have great staff as well that are always willing to share lessons learned. Once you've decided to do something, you've got kind of two choices. You can do what everybody else in the area has done that people are used to, or you can start experimenting on your own. I'll show a couple examples that are unique and a couple examples that I'm sure all of you have seen, and we'll go over some of the pros and cons. This is just one I found when I started Googling around, so I thought that was amusing. This example here is curb bump outs. Essentially what we're trying to do here, this is in McFarland, are trying to narrow the road at points of potential conflict. This is a crosswalk right near the high school. Narrowing the available pavement to a driver is quite effective on slowing down speeds. You can still drive 100 miles an hour if you want, but most drivers tend to slow down, be a little bit more alert when their available real estate is constrained. So what we're doing here with the bump outs, it's essentially mimicking parked cars, which narrows the street, has the added benefit of minimizing the exposure that a pedestrian has to traffic by shortening that crosswalk. In addition, it gives the pedestrians a little bit better of a field of view where they're sticking themselves out closer to the car so they can see each other. These were placed in series and seem to have a pretty positive impact on speeds, fairly low or no negative feedback that we've seen on those. Pavement markings are another way, a low-cost way to simulate that narrowness. This is Valley Drive in McFarland. It's a 44-foot wide street, so quite wide. Had and continue to get speed complaints, though there was not budget and the street was not slated for reconstruction for many years. So what was proposed here and did have some positive impact was creating this narrowness by striping off the parking lines, creating bike lanes where previously none had existed, and then just forcing, at least visually forcing the drivers into an 11-foot wide corridor, whereas before they had 22 feet if people weren't parked there. This is on Fordham in Madison, just south of Maple Bluff. Here, the city did something similar, though it just created kind of a dead zone with paint and hash marks for this similar goal of trying to provide that visual narrowing for traffic where you don't have parked cars, for example. Everybody has certainly some opinion on speed humps. This is in Shorewood Hills, which has done quite a bit of experimenting on the geometry of humps. Madison has settled into a very standard cross-section of the height and the ramp length of speed humps. Shorewood Hills has been a little more open to trying different things out. They are a bit more concerned about those high-end speeds and have experimented with increasing the height, shortening the ramp to get both the 85th percentile speed down to 20 miles an hour, which is their village-wide speed limit, and essentially eliminate the high-end speeds. That does come at a cost. If you ever drive through Edge Hill Drive in Shorewood Hills, those speed humps were very successful from one perspective because they're getting 85th percentile speeds at the 21 mile an hour level. However, for the rest of us that are going 20 miles an hour anyway, they are a bit violent. There's definitely negative feedback. If you take those at 30, you'll scrape. So those have been a bit polarizing in the outside of that neighborhood. The neighborhood itself loves them. The folks that used that street and do use that street to get from A to B generally hate them. So those were quite polarizing, but in a community that's willing to take a chance, there are options available. This one is also in Shorewood Hills. These humps are right by the school. They were the first set of speed humps that the village experimented with, and it's also just north of their fire department EMS building. They were very concerned about response time impact. So these were put in an offset way. So only one lane has them, with the working and understanding that the emergency vehicles, if they need to hoof it, they'll simply cross the center line and go against traffic and then go around them and avoid any disruption to the patients inside or scraping the large apparatuses. Islands are becoming a bit more popular. This one is actually in Seattle. It is not one that we've worked on. It does highlight a couple things, though, that if a community is looking to install islands, should be aware of. In the residential neighborhoods, which is where we usually work at Town and Country, things that work well for a sedan do not work at all for a snowplow or a moving truck or a school bus. So anytime you're laying things out, we always recommend include those street vehicles in your design so that at least you're deliberately cutting off access or know that you're forcing a semi to maybe go the wrong way around this island. In particular, if you choose to put this sign in the middle, flowers in the middle, this tree, we would generally not recommend a tree as they get larger and larger. If a car is not paying attention, you're at some levels introducing danger to the equation, and somebody could just hit it. So trying to sort of protect those drivers as well, even though they're not doing what they should, always looking to do no harm with the layouts that we're proposing. Another thing that we've done a lot of in recent times is just a road diet. This is Brewery Road in Cross Plains. That street used to be 38 and 40 feet wide. It had parking on both sides and was recently reconstructed. And in looking at it, a lot of the homes that were along that corridor didn't have driveways on it. Their backyards fronted against this street. And in talking with the neighbors, they had concerns about speeding, so we simply narrowed the road. In areas where there were homes, we bumped the street back out to allow for parking. But in other areas where there weren't, we just simply necked it down and then pinched it even further at the intersections here with these median islands, so that there's actually only 10 feet of blacktop available. These islands, you can see the school bus there actually in the aerial photo. They are only 2 inches high. So if you take them at 20 miles an hour, you will not lose control. You're not going to lose a tire. And if you're a school bus, you can drive over them unnecessarily. So that was the compromise the village was making on that. So in summary, we always just recommend that if you're going to go ahead with changing things, that you're aware of the limitations there. There are no silver bullets. Some drivers will simply ignore them. They'll take the speed hump at 40 because they want to go 40 miles an hour. It's important to balance that risk reward. And in particular there, what we're describing are the downstream effects of making one route slower. At least one driver and maybe a lot of drivers are going to declare that that's no longer their favorite route and they're going to go somewhere else. So in some cases, you do end up playing whack-a-mole and simply chasing those fast or distracted drivers somewhere else. We do recommend what we call a shakedown period. There'll always be feedback as soon as they're reopened to traffic, some good, some bad, but it helps to have some sort of, hey, we're keeping this in for X years and we're just going to evaluate it. And that gives the community a chance to both avoid a yo-yo response if detractors come out of the woodwork, but also allows just society to sort of get used to the new normal. And then lastly, the framework thing we talked about is if you're simply putting them in because you get a lot of complaints without objective data, it's difficult to ever say no to a lot of complaints somewhere else. Those Madison and Middleton documents have a very specific scoring criteria by which each project is evaluated. They're fairly militant about that. If it doesn't score enough points, it just doesn't happen. If they don't get enough community support, and they do that via poll, they actually vote, the neighborhood votes on it, it doesn't happen. Similarly for removing them. To remove them, you need a certain amount of votes and a certain radius of that device. So certainly lots of tools in the toolbox. There are some nice online resources that USDOT puts out. In particular, in the middle there, that traffic calming e-primer has dozens of examples that do a little bit more in depth of pro and con listing than I just did. But these publications are all available online and certainly worth a read if your community is starting to entertain those, or with your engineering staff as you're wanting to utilize these on a project moving forward. So with that, I'll get the screen back to the group and stand by.
Okay, well, thank you both. Both were very informative. I'll start out with a first question, and then after that, we can just kind of be informal. If you can unmute yourselves and introduce yourself and ask your question. I guess my question is, I've seen in other states, primarily in traffic intersections where there's cameras, and if you run a red light, you can be issued a ticket. I don't believe that's legal in Wisconsin, but in your work, have either one of you seen measures like that for traffic calming?
I'll start with that one. So absolutely, it's used around the country, and they're extremely effective, right? In the sense that once, in most cases, they're clearly identified with signage that says that this intersection is being monitored through camera enforcement. Speed enforcement is another common method of doing such. They work very well, but you are correct. We currently cannot do that in Wisconsin.
Okay. Brian, any similar experiences?
We get a lot of requests for the cameras for sure. The same answer is just Wisconsin doesn't allow it. I do know that Madison does have a lot of cameras that are used for accident recreation, that kind of thing, and to supplement law enforcement. So if a human police officer gives you a ticket for a red light and you can test it, then they pull the video. So they have that ability, but not as a primary deterrent.
Okay. Let's go to Jim Schuler from Maple Bluff. Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Bob and Ann, for putting this together, and thanks, David and Brian, for leading the discussion. The point that Bob brought up, the cameras. So Maple Bluff does have, Brian, you might know better than I do how many flock cameras we have. it's been, and we've only had them up, I don't even know if it's been a year yet, but it's been our strategy to not heavily mark them or sign them so that we can in fact use them to catch ne'er-do-wells like stolen cars, things like that. But am I right in thinking that what you were saying, David, was that if you want to use them as part of a traffic calming strategy, you need to mark them and let people know that they're active and that they're being seen?
Yeah, my experience has been that's exactly right. That the idea of using them as an enforcement measure in terms of a traffic calming related device is in fact, yeah, don't hide them, show them, let the traveling public know that they're there, because if they don't know that they're there, then the whole idea of trying to change your behavior because of the potential enforcement is lost to some degree in the process. Now, yes, I understand your cameras, Jim, and what Brian pointed out. Many communities, and I'm familiar with the Madison ones as well, are there more for a law enforcement type presence, right, and catching things beyond just traffic operations, and fully understand keeping those a little bit more private. But if you want to get into traffic calming, traffic enforcement, then yes, I think my experience and what the literature shows is it's very effective to let people know that they're there, because it does change their behavior.
And one additional question: how effective are radar speed signs? I don't know if that's the correct term, but when you're going down a road and you can see your speed.
Yeah, I'll start with that, and then Brian, jump in if you have other thoughts. But the literature is quite clear that any type of speed information along those lines is often effective within a halo, if you will, a general area of the sign. Upstream and downstream, it tends to be not effective. So in other words, people will lower their speed near the sign and go up, because it's often assumed that that sign is associated with some enforcement of some kind, right? So anytime you put a changeable message sign out there or a dynamic speed signing like that, it does change behavior, but generally only in the area of the sign.
Agreed. Yeah, we've seen pretty effective installation of those in a number of places. I'd say more effective for the permanent installations than like the trailers that are there for a while, then go. We don't see that once the trailer is gone, that people continue to drive slow. It seems like the permanent ones are a bit more effective. And again, within that 2-3 block radius, they do have a commercially available ones can easily be solar powered nowadays. If you're looking for price points for the ones that record data and counts, so you can run all kinds of analyses, you're probably running in the $10,000 to $15,000 range. If you're just looking for the speed feedback, probably under 10,000, 5 to 10,000 for that device.
Okay. Other questions? Just feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Jim, you have another one? Go ahead.
I've got plenty more.
Okay.
But regarding the speed signs, you talked about recording data. Have either of you used any of the MPO data? So on the Madison, is it planning organization? On their site, they list all sorts of GIS data and things like that. And how much are you aware of that, and how useful is that data in designing traffic calming measures and measuring them?
Brian, you want to go?
I can top on that one. Yeah. They're a fantastic resource particularly for legacy information. Jim, one of the things you and I have talked a little bit about in the past, and I'm sure it's still a concern in the village, it's cut through traffic, right? And being able to just look at historical data to see, are we seeing more cars per day or not? As far as design, we would always prefer, as long as budgets allow, for a modern, specific study of the traffic characteristics you've got going at that spot or in that neighborhood today. They're not that expensive. Dane County Highway actually contracts out counters and speed detection equipment. And so usually for like less than $1,000, you can get 2 or 3 locations for a week or 2. And that gives you, very up-to-date, allows you to just pick, the time of year that you're going to be doing it. The MPO counts are whenever they collect them, so if you're near a school, you may want to do it during school season or not school season. If you're near a golf course, you may want to do it during golf season or not during golf season. If you're near Camp Randall, what kind of things are you trying to quantify? So they're a great resource. They're excellent for kind of screening tools, but for a specific design, we would always suggest getting your own discrete data.
Are there any ways to make standard stop signs more effective? Short of enforcing actually the stop sign, with personnel. I mean, is there any automation that's available or blinking lights, something else?
So there are, and I guess I'll start, Brian, you can jump in. So TAPCO produces a sign that's called blinker stop, right? So you've seen them. I know, I see Ross here. I live in the city of Fitchburg, and there's a number of them in Fitchburg, that at least I'm familiar with that. And I'm sure you've all seen them that have the red LEDs, and they also could be used on other types of signs as well. But those have been proven to be effective, and I'll defer to those communities are using them for their feedback. But Brian, you may have some experience with those as well.
Yeah, I actually drive by the Fitchburg ones all the time. I live in Oregon. So those seem to be pretty effective. They're also solar powered. I've never actually been part of an installation. I'm not sure what they cost. Ross, do you have a?
I've only been at Fitchburg for a short time, but they're not that expensive. And generally, anecdotally, what we see is they help with people who might, just not be paying attention and blow through a stop sign. That's a lot harder to do when there's blinking LEDs on it. So, but we don't run
Jim's
into
point,
any maintenance or anything like that for them either. So,
to your question, Jim, about making people come to a complete stop, we haven't seen that. The flashing lights absolutely help with, hey, there is a stop sign there, but if you're going to be a roller, we haven't found the tool that's going to turn you into a stopper, other than a police officer. Those are always very effective.
David, has your lab done any studies on how much enforcement you need to make passive traffic controls or traffic calming measures effective? I mean, do you need to go Rosendale, all out Rosendale, or?
Yeah. Yes, and we have looked at those, not recently, and I'm familiar with the body of literature in this area. And similar to the comment I previously made, in the sense that when there is an enforcement component there, it works. But 5 minutes before it gets there and 5 minutes after it leaves, it's very much of a halo effect, right? You see the speeds go right back. So the only way to make it effective is the Rosendale process, of where it's pretty constant, it's pretty daily, and the word gets out that 9 times out of 10 there's going to be someone there looking for you, and it changes behavior through that community. I drive through there from time to time. I don't know anybody that speeds through Rosendale, and if they do, you're going to get caught more times than not, right? So it's a behavior component that's built throughout the community. Now that's a small one little couple of stretches of roadway. But yes, that's the general feedback, Jim, is that unless it's a constant presence, and I can give you all kinds of examples of things that have been tried to do this, but there's generally not a long-term effect, and effect outside of the region that the enforcement is in place.
And one last question. This is for Forbes. I think Forbes, you're on the call. What's the status of, I know last year or maybe the year before, there was legislation that was being considered to allow us to use cameras for speeding tickets, failure to stop at stoplights, that type of thing. Is that gone by the wayside?
I haven't looked at where it is today, but that bill's been introduced for, I think, over 10 years. So 5 or 6 sessions, and it always fails to pass. But I will say that there's been more discussion going on, especially with some of the issues that Milwaukee and some other communities have had with people running red lights and traffic statistics. I have to check in with them, but it's been a tough bill in the past to ever get passage on because of that idea that more government oversight and regulation, big brother. But I can check on it to see where it is, but it's failed many sessions in the past.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Before we go to Ross, Beth from City of Verona has posted in the chat, if both of you can look at that. She's asking, what is the URL for the GIS data resource that was just discussed here this afternoon? Does anybody have more information on that?
That is at, let me just scroll screen. So that's, if you go to, Beth, if you go to greatermadisonmpo.org.
I think Ross just put it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Ross, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if any of the municipal people here, or David or Brian, if you've ever attempted to change your existing traffic management process. Ours in Fitchburg is pretty similar to Middleton's, but we're looking at making some changes to that process and just running into a lot of pushback on things I would not have expected pushback on. So I didn't know of anyone else's experiences there.
What have you gotten pushback on?
So we require a certain percentage of the affected neighborhood to sign a petition. One issue we've been running into is if there's any apartments in the area at all, you just can't meet that percentage. It's 50% right now. So once you have a 100-unit apartment, people just aren't going to get 50 plus signatures on their petition. Some of the other stuff is lowering the speed threshold. So we run it by an 85th percentile speed, and that has to be over 35 miles per hour. But attempting to lower that threshold to 30 miles an hour, we're getting pushback on, well, we're going to see too many of these requests and we're going to have speed bumps all over the city and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think at the end of the day, a lot of these measures can be effective, but I will say that I think it comes down to enforcement. When you look at the behavior of people driving in today's society, it's just amazing how fast and how dangerous people are driving. And we just talked about Rosendale. Rosendale has a reputation, and it's a reputation that they have put out deliberately, but it has been effective, at least for them. One other question for David and Brian. You don't see this very often, but I know a number of years ago, you would see unmanned police cars just parked in random places. just to either slow people down or to get their attention. Do you really see that anymore? And are there any studies that show how effective it is or not being effective?
Yeah, I can address that one at least to start here. That was another example to Jim's question that I was going to elaborate on, and with a similar outcome. Yes, the literature is full of examples like that where it's been tried. In the world of social media, as soon as somebody realizes that there's not a human being in the vehicle, the word gets out, and there's a little bit of a drop or a little bit of a halo effect near the vehicle, but it tends not to be a long-term solution. So it doesn't take long for the driving population to figure out it's not effective and communicate it appropriately.
Yeah, we just don't see it at all. We're not intimately involved with the police forces in the communities we work with, but I do chat with them and they see the same thing. It's just too quickly people realize it's not there. And to a certain extent, some of the communities we work in only have the one police car. So they just don't have enough to put out there.
Well, we're just a few minutes away from 1 o'clock. Brian or David, do you have any last words for us before we wrap things up?
I'll start. So thank you for the opportunity to visit with you, and glad to anybody that wants to have a follow-up conversation or anytime you want to track me down for questions or anything I can provide, please do. I'll also, if you're not familiar with one thing that we produce at the university called Community Maps, and it provides all the traffic data, traffic crash data in your communities and so forth that we update pretty regularly. It's a pretty good resource, and from the safety side, please take a look at it and hopefully you'll find it useful.
Okay. Brian?
What we've seen is in the communities that have had the most heartburn with it are those that were a bit hesitant to actually create a policy document, and things got awkward and political fairly quickly on how to say yes and how to say no. So we would always recommend, if you're looking to dip your toe in that pool, at least establish some criteria by which you're going to evaluate requests, if nothing else, for posterity's sake, so that you can determine what you're going to say to the next request.
Okay. And then Beth is asking, can a link to the traffic data website be posted to the chat as well? And Ross just did that. Thank you. So again, David and Brian, thank you so much for being here today. And this was very informative, including learning that the world is short of engineers. So perhaps we can all kind of spread that word and get more people interested in that great profession. So we're almost at
interns.
And interns, yes. So we're almost out of time here. I want to thank everyone for attending. And again, a special thanks to David and Brian for being our presenters today. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
We did.